Dignitaries and ladies and gentlemen, warm welcome on behalf of CPM Sri Lanka for the 31st presentation of Evening for Managers, a strategy and management approach to lead restructuring SOEs in tandem with IMF proposal. That's the topic, that's the focus today, and we have a power-packed lineup of keynote speakers and a worthwhile panel discussion to come up, and I'm sure when the time goes, there'll be more in numbers in the audience. Just to give a preamble to EFM and CPM Sri Lanka as per what we have been doing over the years and what we are looking at in terms of this workshop and moving forward. So basically, this EFM, this 31st EFM is organized physically after a lapse of about a couple of years. After a series of physical sessions due to the global pandemic as well as of the national crisis, we had to curtail it to online. But now, after a lapse of a couple of years, we are back again here with all of you in a physical EFM on our 31st session. So title of today's presentation, as I did say, a strategy and management approach to lead restructuring SOEs in tandem with IMF proposal. From the April 2022, the government has been in discussion with the IMF about the need for implementing a coherent and credible strategy to restore the macroeconomic stability and the importance of stronger safety net as per the IMF policy statement related. So there will be two aspects to the restructuring in the country, which has already begun, and talks on debt restructuring with creditors. There's also a need to make the administrative sector efficient and productive. It has to decide whether it will be in business or whether it will only be the enabler of business. CPM Sri Lanka invited experts to clarify on this whole scenario as well as what we can foresee and discuss the advances and explain how it's going to be in this entire process. So on that note, we have the power-packed panelists, the keynote speakers ready to take you through this point of discussion. On that note, let me not forget, prior to starting off, our strategic partners. Our strategic partner, MasterCard, is hands-on with EFM and CPM over the years, as well as our exclusive print media partner in Daily Mirror and Daily FT. To formally welcome all of you, let me take the honor of inviting the President and the founder of CPM Sri Lanka, Professor Lakshmana Vatwala. Professor, over to you.
Good evening to all of you. Let me welcome you to this Chartered Professional Managers Evening for Managers Forum that we are having today. And we have a very interesting topic today, a strategy and management approach to lead restructuring SOEs in tandem with IMF proposals. Considering the importance of this topic, we are very happy that someone who has been leading and working out the strategies on this, Mr. Suresh Shah, is present here. So we are very happy that he will give the keynote address, and he will be supported by Ms. Sandya Salgado and Mr. Chathuranga Abeysinghe. So I'm sure that all of you will be able to listen to a very interesting program, and I'm sure that there would also be a very good panel discussion. So we also have our members of the council who are here from CPM, our members, our sponsors and invitees. So we are very happy to see you at a time that I think this is one of the first few meetings that we are having after the COVID pandemic, and I'm happy to see that we have a large gathering for this event. Now, today, as you know, we are, although maybe all of you are present here, we all know the situation in which we are. And we are really in a very bad situation financially, and of course that will impact the economy and also the society. You all know the grave dangers of not being able to pay a loan if you have taken. So what is there in personal life is also being experienced by the government. Because all of them, all this time, they said that they can do anything for their benefit, but ultimately their benefit by right or wrong means have resulted in poor in this current situation. So our body, as you know, the Chartered Professional Managers, I think the main root for this situation is either bad management or you call it mismanagement. Whatever profession you are, Mr. Suresh Shah is a chartered accountant, we are all in the same profession, but it's really the management profession that has taken him to the top. He's headed the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, headed some of the leading private sector firms. So accounting knowledge is really maybe a driver, but if you are not a proper manager, you will not be able to get anything done. That's why I'm sure the government has also appointed him as the chairman of this committee, high-powered committee, to restructure corporations. Of course, one thing, there is a difference in the private sector and the state sector. Private sector will always look for results. They will also be better managed. And the most important thing is they are accountable. Unfortunately, in government sector, all these are missing. No wonder that although we from the private sector think that the country is doing very well or your company is doing well, ultimately, the failure of the government will result in your failure also. Recently, we had one of our speakers who was speaking on strategy. He said his company is one of the biggest telecom companies. But what happened? They had to incur a 30 billion loss as a result of the depreciation of the currency. So you can see you may make the biggest profit, but ultimately, if the government is not managing themselves properly, then there is a serious problem. So we are very happy that the government has now realized that their people are not managing things efficiently. That's why they have got people like Mr. Suresh Shah, because we need public-private sector participation. I can see the chairman of the Export Development Board here. They are from the private sector. They've gone now to the public sector to reform them and to rebuild this country. So you must realize that, because I know that he was chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. At that time, after each budget, they were clapping. They were praising the government. No one realized what is the balance sheet of the country. Where are they taking this money to give them all these subsidies, to reduce the taxation? So that is a fault of the private sector. Private sector must be watchdog of the government sector. If they don't do that, we are all going to be in a very sad situation. So today, this item is a very important thing in our country. Now there are certain maybe projects, industries, which are there in the public sector. But if you really look at it, some of those may be managed very efficiently by the state corporations. If you take the petroleum corporation, before the privatization, all the world-class companies were managing it. Esso, Mobil, Shell, all these world-class companies. So I don't think that there will be a problem in that. But there are others, maybe take the electricity sector, which will not only need the efficient management, but maybe good thinking and good planning, and as we say here, good strategy. Because it's a mix of things, and ultimately, in the case of fuel, who is the buyer? The private sector, the private people. But in the case of electricity, if you produce something, the state is buying it now. So if you buy it at a lower price, good. If you buy it at a higher price, then the consumer will have to pay that higher price. So that's something that we need to take into account, because if you take maybe the hydro, the cheapest, 250. If you take maybe coal, 950. If you take electricity, maybe depending on the fuel, the fuel, 3950. Then if you look at the maybe solar and others, if they can sell the power at a lower price, then the consumer will benefit. But if they ask for a price higher than what is there in the thermal, then you are sunk. You have to pay it. So this is something that we have to realize. But the important thing is the accountability. We should be free of corruption, transparency. These all have to come. I was just telling Mr. Suresh Shah also that before this goes through, the new bill of corruption-free society, we has to come in. That's already there in Parliament, but yesterday we had another seminar. They were saying that there are certain amendments to be done. But this has to come, because you see, sometimes those in the private sector, I know all of you are in the private, because when we have these seminars, hardly anyone from the public sector comes, because who pays for them? They are getting their salary whether they work or not. So that's something that we have to see, because if you don't work, you will not get your salary, or you might tomorrow have to go home. Or some of them will maybe trying to go overseas. That's another biggest problem, but I don't want to speak on that area. But I think sustainable, they say sustainable investment and debt management. That's very important. And of course, people say that we are going to sell these assets to pay the debt, but I don't know, Mr. Suresh Shah may be able to tell that. But it is very essential. Maybe reduce the budgetary burden of SOEs if they are losing. Now take Sri Lankan Airlines, maybe the Petroleum Corporation. Actually, those are really policies that if the private sector was managing it, you see, the IMF has come to tell us lessons that we should do to correct our economic situation, how we are managing companies. You see, if you buy at a higher price and sell at a lower price, any donkey will know that you are going to lose. That is what has been happening for the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation. Then maybe even in the electricity sector. But what we are saying is that these are things that are known. So one thing that maybe I hope that Mr. Suresh Shah will answer that question, maybe the telecom sector. You see, that was privatized. But now, of course, the talk is that maybe government is going to sell their share, and there are a lot of talk on that. So maybe I would like maybe if we can just shed some light on it, because one of the reasons of privatization is to remove the government interference. Because I am saying this, I was also chairman of a corporation, I run these things, and maybe not at a loss but at a profit, converted loss making to profit. So that's why I am saying, I am talking through experience, my own experience, what I have done, and what we have been able to do, but sacrificing the high salaries I would have got in the private sector. But that doesn't matter. But what I'm saying is, these are simple things which are required. So I'm very thankful for that our committee, I think Mr. Dr. Samantha Ratnayake is also present here, for organizing this. And also the other members who are present here, because we now have to really realize what is happening. You must always keep a watch to see what the government is doing. Today the depreciation rate may come down, tomorrow it will go up, so those are all affecting. You see, if you look at why the prices went up, it is really due to the depreciation. No? With that, the doubling of our exchange rate, all prices went up. So these are things that we have to keep in mind, because you will do well, but you must also see that the government is also doing it well. Ultimately, we will all be finished if the government is. Fortunately, the IMF has come and they have helped us, because no one will help anyone in distress. If you, a person who has maybe not paid your loans, the banks will kick you out. Fortunately, we have, at least the IMF has come and maybe they have been working, they have had the confidence in us. So it is now up to us to see that whatever that we are doing is done in the right way for the benefit of the people. That's the most important thing, because I think Mr. Suresh Shah will know, as professional chartered accountants, we are there to serve the nation. We are not there to serve ourselves. Whatever that we do would be in the interest of the nation. This is something the politicians forget. So anyway, I'm sure that we can listen to our speakers, and let me thank them, and also our committee for really organizing this very important area, and that this will give us a lot of new things and as to what is currently happening and how it will benefit the society and the people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for the welcome address. With that, let us move our attention towards the keynote speeches. And of course, we have 3 power-packed speakers today, as I did mention. Of course, we have Mr. Suresh Shah, the Director General of State-Owned Enterprises Restructuring Unit, as well as Chairman of the Ceylon Tobacco Company PLC. Then you also have Ms. Sandya Salgado, Communications Specialist, Independent Director of Ceylon Bank, as well as Board Member of 1990 Suvasaria Foundation. Mr. Chathuranga Abeysinghe, Digital Evangelist, Consultant Digital Transformation and Data Analytics as well with us today. And prior to move on to the presenters, let me tell you that the questions that you may have from each of the speakers, there will be a WhatsApp number that will be, yes, it's there on screen. You can forward your questions to that number so that the moderator will take those questions during the panel discussions. So let me take the honor in inviting our first presenter, none other than Mr. Suresh Shah. He's the Director General, SOEs Restructuring Unit and Chairman of the Ceylon Tobacco PLC. Mr. Shah, over to you.
Thank you, Professor Vatawala, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak on what we are doing at the moment. Before I explain what we are doing, let me kind of tell you the state of affairs of the state-owned enterprises with a little example. Up to a few months back, every one of us in this room enjoyed fuel at a fairly significant subsidy. As a result of that subsidy, the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation made a significant loss, a pretty significant loss. In order to recover a part of this loss, what does the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation do? It charges a very significant premium from all the airlines that fly in and out of Colombo, including Sri Lankan Airlines. Now, about 30% of the operating cost of Sri Lankan Airlines is jet fuel. So as a result of this pretty significant premium, the losses of Sri Lankan Airlines also go up. It doesn't make a loss because of that, but the losses go up significantly because of it. Now, we have both the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation and Sri Lankan Airlines that are making losses. And their business model is not sustainable. So what do? No private bank is willing to fund them. So what do? They go to the state banks, and the state banks, on the basis of government guarantees, of treasury guarantees, provides them with loans. And those loans cannot be serviced. And the treasury guarantees today, because Sri Lanka's financial position, as Professor Vatawala said, our financial position is pretty dire. So the treasury guarantees also don't mean a thing anymore. So now just think about it. It starts with a subsidy. The subsidies are parked in an entity. The entity is not sustainable. It goes and borrows money from a state bank. It cannot repay, and the state bank balance sheet is also now under pressure. So the entire system has got weak because of a way in which a subsidy was passed down. Now, I'm not for a moment saying that government does not have the right to give a subsidy. A government has a right to give a subsidy, particularly if during an election campaign, a political party makes a promise to the citizens of the country, gets elected, it has to maintain its promise. But there is a way in which it needs to be done. And this is one of the things that we are looking at when we start unraveling this whole process, right? So the first point that I want to make is that state-owned enterprise restructuring is not about privatization. Privatization will be a part of it, but the aim, the objective of SOE restructuring is not about privatization. It is about two very fundamental things. Firstly, it's about building a competitive economy. And why do I say competitive economy? Because as long as entities remain within the state, it gets special privileges. And I'll give you an example of this, Sri Lanka Insurance Corporation, which we are unraveling at the moment. The insurance law in the country, says that life insurance and general insurance cannot remain within the same legal entity. Every single insurance company in the country, other than Sri Lanka Insurance Corporation, has segregated. But Sri Lanka Insurance Corporation has not. And that is because it is a government-owned entity and it has been allowed to flout the law. That's a special privilege, right? So how do you build, how do you think the other insurance companies feel when it has to compete with an entity that is not keeping to the legal framework of the country? So you cannot build a competitive framework unless you unravel the SOE sector. So this is one of the fundamental reasons. The second reason why we need SOE restructuring is to provide citizens of this country with better quality products and services at reasonable pricing and with appropriate availability. So these are the two fundamental reasons why SOE restructuring is important. And it is from this perspective that you may have to privatize enterprises. And again, let me reinforce this. The reason for privatization is to make these enterprises more efficient so that they in turn can provide essential goods and services to the citizens of this country at better quality products and services, better pricing, and better availability. Now, how does, and of course, in this process of restructuring, like I said, some enterprises will be privatized and some will remain within government. Now, there is a very fundamental manner in which this decision needs to be taken. Unfortunately, the conversation around how this decision should be taken seems to lie with whether the enterprise is making a profit or a loss. So the story is that if it is making a profit, let it be. If it is making a loss, sell it. In other words, what we are saying, and so I'm coming to you now from the chartered accountancy background which Professor Vatavela spoke about. If you say that it's only loss-making enterprises that can be sold, think about it from the buyer's perspective. Why should a buyer buy a loss-making enterprise? Right? If you want to sell only loss-making enterprises, then I'm asking you, why would a buyer want to buy a loss-making enterprise? Fundamentally, companies are not bought and sold on profits and losses. Companies, businesses are bought and sold on strategy. This is my personal experience. I know this as a fact because during my commercial life, when I was a CEO of a company, we actually bought a closed down company. Forget losses, it was actually not operational, it was closed down and we spent quite a bit of money for that company. We did it for very strategic reasons. Right? So companies get bought and sold for strategic reasons. That is why both profitable and loss-making companies are bought and sold. So from a government's perspective, as an owner of an enterprise, how would it decide on retaining or divesting an enterprise? What is the strategic reason? And really the strategic reason is more about which enterprises we want to retain rather than which enterprises we want to divest. So the real question is, what do we want to retain and how do we address that point? So from a very strategic perspective, you go back to asking the question of what are the fundamental responsibilities of government? And that's where you find the answer to this. So the fundamental responsibilities of government is law and order, national security, its education system, healthcare system, economic policy, foreign policy, and it is the supply of essential goods and services to the citizens. And this is important, essential goods and services. I was introduced as the chairman of the Ceylon Tobacco Company, and I can tell you, tobacco, cigarettes are not an essential product. So government does not need to worry about the supply of cigarettes to the population, right? For 30 years, I was the chief executive of the Lion Brewery, and that is not an essential product or a service, and government does not need to worry about whether that is available to the citizens or not. However, there are other essential goods and services that the government does need to worry about. Okay? So the government needs to ask itself, are the citizens of this country getting essential products and services at a reasonable price, at a reasonable quality, and at appropriate availability? And if the answer is yes, we can ensure that that happens, then the government does not need to get involved in that business, because there are other ways in which it can be done. And let me take an example of this. It's a silly example, but please indulge me for a moment. How many of you in the audience eat fish? Okay. How many of you actually catch the fish you eat? No one, right? Why? Because there are many ways in which you can get the fish that you want, but you're interested in is the outcome, the fact that you will have fish to eat. And you can do that by going to the supermarket and buying the fish. If you're living out of Colombo, you might go to the town, the fish stall, and buy the fish. In today's digital age, you can order it online. In the old days, I remember the fishmonger used to come down the road on a push cycle with a wooden thing at the back selling the fish. So there are many ways in which you can get it. You don't actually need to go catch the fish that you eat. Very similarly, the government has many ways to ensure that citizens have access to essential products and services. It doesn't need to actually be in the business of supplying it. Now, why is it that it's not necessary for government, or that government actually shouldn't be in the business of some of these things? Because the government needs to invest its resources. And when I speak of resources, it's not just the money, but the focus of the people working for government. And yes, of course, even the money. It needs to invest these money and these other resources in the true national assets of our country. Now, how do you define a national asset, particularly when it comes to a country? For me, the definition is very simple. Assets that you can leverage to develop and grow the country, to transform a nation. Those are the true national assets. So I ask you, think about this. Is there any enterprise that you can put a finger on, point a finger at, and say that this particular enterprise is an enterprise that will help transform our nation? Just think about it. Is there a single enterprise that you can say, can you point a finger and say, this enterprise will transform this nation? On the other hand, think of the real national assets that we have, the assets that can truly, genuinely transform this country. And what are those assets? It's the younger generation of our country. Number one, they can transform. It is the education system of our country that can help us transform. It's the healthcare system of our country that can help transform. It's the soil of our country. You know, you plant anything in our soil and that will grow. That can help transform. It is the sea that surrounds us, because there is so much marine life there. That can help transform. It's the irrigation system of our country. You know, our irrigation system, I've had experience working with the irrigation system very closely, and believe me, it's an amazing system. It captures water from multiple sources, it stores it, and then it moves it to the last acre of a farmer's land. That's an amazing system. And that needs, and we should leverage that to transform our country. So we need to put our assets, to put our resources into transforming our country, and here is where we need to focus our attention. It's on these assets that we need to focus, not on some commercial enterprise. And why do I say this? Because when we start focusing on commercial enterprises and when we start putting our resources behind commercial enterprises, we forget the true national assets of our country and we do not invest behind them. And you have seen it. Any one of you here who's happy with the investments that we make in our education system? Anyone in the audience? Anyone in the audience who's happy with the investments we make in our healthcare system? Anyone here who's happy in the investments that we make in our younger generation? In our agriculture? So where are we focusing on? But we are very concerned about these so-called national assets, which are fundamentally commercial enterprises. So we need to refocus our attention. We need to unchain these enterprises from government control. You know, I find this really ironic, and today I was having a conversation with a colleague because we are in the process of appointing transaction advisors for some of these institutions. You know, the funny thing is that if we in the private sector were appointing transaction advisors, we would have done it within probably 2 weeks. And what would we do? We would probably call 5 investment bankers over the phone and tell them, here's what we want to do. Please send us proposals. Proposals would come. Few of us would sit around the table, open the proposals, evaluate it, take a call, appoint the transaction advisors. In government, it's now taken us 3 months because of the system that we have to follow. So on paper, government has an extremely tight procurement process, right? You would think a black ant, a tiny black ant couldn't go through that. Compared to the private sector procurement process, the government procurement process is an auditor's dream, let me tell you, as a chartered accountant, right? But the irony is this: the corruption in government is way more than in the private sector. How is that? Okay? And also think about something else. When I always take this example, look at the decision making that happens with these enterprises. Take Sri Lankan Airlines. Sri Lankan Airlines need to lease planes. Right? They're in the business of flying, so they need to lease planes. Their planes are old at the moment. Now, how does the leasing process happen now? Just think about, if you're a private sector enterprise, management would make a presentation to the board would discuss it, and probably in 4 to 6 weeks, a decision would be made. Yes, there may be more than one board meeting, right? 4 to 6 weeks, decision would be made. You would be talking to lessors by now. For Sri Lankan Airlines, management needs to make a presentation to the board needs to agree on that. Then it needs to make a submission to the ministry secretary. The ministry secretary needs to agree to it. Then it needs to go to the minister. The minister needs to agree to it, and then it has to go to cabinet, right? And who in cabinet knows to lease planes? So the decision is being taken by people who really have no subject knowledge, and it takes so much time. So how does a commercial enterprise, a state-owned commercial enterprise, how would it compete with the private sector? When the private sector can take a decision within probably 6 weeks on such a big contract, okay? On a small contract, private sector would probably take it in a much shorter period of time. How would these SOEs compete, right? So we need to unchain these SOEs. So the word privatization is actually wrong. I would say unchain, right? And the second thing that we must all give our attention to, I believe every one of you or the majority of you are private sector, right? Anybody who's in government service? So very few. Manjula, you're not raising your hand. You're not sure where you are. Okay. Manjula, by the way, is at SLT. Those of you in the private sector, tell me, how many of you would really like to have a financially challenged major shareholder? Particularly think about it if you're a growing business that requires a lot of investment. how many of you would want to have as your major shareholder a financially challenged shareholder? And think about Sri Lanka. Do we have the wealth that we should have? So how does a financially challenged Sri Lankan government, who's a major shareholder of all these SOEs, how does it benefit those enterprises? And if it doesn't benefit those enterprises, how does it benefit the employees? How does it benefit the creditors? How does it benefit the financial institutions that support those enterprises? So ladies and gentlemen, I've taken about 25 minutes. These are the fundamental issues that we need to deal with. But most importantly, understand this one very simple point. The process of divestiture or privatization is not to give private shareholders some fancy assets. That's not what it is. It is about unchaining these enterprises. It is about giving these enterprises the shareholders that these enterprises deserve, the people with the right financial and technical backing. And most importantly, it is about providing the citizens of our country essential goods and services of a better quality, of a better price, and with the appropriate level of availability. So I'll stop with that and I'll take your questions later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for those wonderful insights. I am sure we can hear more from you during the panel discussion. Let me now take the privilege of inviting our second keynote speaker. That's none other than Ms. Sandya Salgado. She is a communications specialist and also independent director of Ceylon Bank and a board member of 1990 Source Area Foundation. Ms. Salgado, over to you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Very pleased to be here, and thank you for inviting me to share some of my thoughts with you. Let me first say that I have been working in the private sector for yonks, have also been working in the development sector, and also had lots of dealings with the public sector, the government institutions. And hands down, I'm a complete believer in the private sector process and the private sector mentality. So because I seriously, I can't even understand how people work in the government and public sector. I'm sorry, but I just can't get over with how slow and how everything else is so procedural, and how people work in the public sector. I really would like to, compliment them because it needs a special skill, I think, and I definitely don't have that. I actually want to talk to you today mostly about the fact that whatever the institution is, needs a private sector attitude. And the need is really an attitudinal shift more than anything else. Because otherwise, we, like Suresh said, we have so many issues that we are dealing with. And even if you transform it, if you don't have the right attitude, I don't know where we will end up being as a country. So I want to just take you through, okay. So this is a picture of Aurangabad Airport that I took in 2023. I visited this airport a couple of years ago, and it was nothing like this. And when I went to this airport just this February, I was completely mesmerized. And as you know, this is a small airport in a small city. And I think, at that time I thought, this is way ahead of our international airport. And I spoke to people, and I wanted to find out what happened? I mean, how did they transform themselves like this? And I was told that it was given to the private sector to manage the airport. And it was amazing how the service levels, the cleanliness, the processes, I mean, it was unbelievable. So if a small airport like this in India can transform itself, I'm not even going down the road of Delhi or Mumbai airports, which are like world-class plus. But I just took this example as a very small city airport, and the transformation was unbelievable. So this is an example of making a change, whether it's privatizing or coming up with some kind of other process to make the management efficient and profitable is what we are talking about here. So I actually wanted to take the case study of 1990 SOEs area because I am on the board of that, just to share with you that it is also a government agency coming under a ministry. But we run it with 100% private sector attitude and mindset. So I'm just going to take a few moments to share with you the process and the whole management of 1990 ambulance system. And as I really want to stress on the fact that this is a government agency that is run with 100% private sector mindset. And let me just rewind a little bit. In 2015, when the Yahapalana government took office, you know this story, but I'll be very brief. The Indian government wanted to give something to Sri Lanka, and we asked for this ambulance service, and Prime Minister Modi was very generous to oblige. And they gave us a grant, and you know all the problems that were faced with an Indian project coming to Sri Lanka, but all that is now water under the bridge. They gave a grant and they did the management to begin with. And after that, the country decided that they would run the service themselves. And in order to do that, under an Act of Parliament, SOEs area Foundation was created. So this whole thing is being run by a board and a very committed team of management as a public agency, a government agency. But it is nothing like a government agency, and I will tell you why and how. So we just operate on, okay, so our vision is nothing but saving lives. So saving lives at any cost is what we are after. So in order to do that, there are 4 pillars that we work on: clarity of purpose, integrity, transparency, and accountability. And we would not move an inch away from these 4 pillars. So I'm just questioning you, even if it's even if we are a part of if you're a part of a public sector entity, this is not something difficult to do. But do we do that is a question. Does anybody have a vision in the public sector? Does anybody care? So that is where the problem is. Because we become mere paid employees in the public sector, unlike in the private sector. So talking about clarity of purpose, I'm just comparing the two so that it's very clear. At SOEs area, we have an apolitical chairman and board of directors with one common goal. And the goal is, how do we continue to save lives most efficiently and effectively, maximizing government funds? because actually we are a cost center. We are not a profit center. But that doesn't mean that we are just about throwing money and wasting government money. So it's always about how do we maximize the budget that is given to us. In fact, the budget that's given to us is far less than what we really need. But that apart, let's take the public sector. Public sector attitude is not my car, not my petrol, because whether I work or not, I get paid. And leadership hardly inspires teams, nor do they lead by example. So SOEs area, as I said, the chairman is completely apolitical and cannot be bent by any political pressure. So for example, if a minister calls and says, can you do such and such, the only thing he says is, can you please send it to me in writing? That's all he says, and a letter never comes. So these are easy to be done if you have a backbone and if you're not a stooge of the politicians. So that's the difference. How many people, private sector or public sector, run companies or agencies who are not stooges, who want to do something to please the politicians, so you scratch my back, I scratch your back. So I think this goes to the private sector organizations as well. It's not only public sector. So as long as we can stand tall on our feet and not bend down to the politicians, I think we can do a much better job. Just that a lot of us don't, because we are just not capable of it. I don't really know why. So another point, SOEs area, the CEO, if you know his salary, you'll be appalled. But he does a 24/7 job. 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, he's on call. Amazing commitment. And we manage with the leanest management team, which is only 30 people. And ongoing training, always striving to do better, is our credo. Because we don't just sit and expect things to move. It's always training and putting them through new work ethics and all of that. Let's take public sector. Is there pride of work? They just don't have pride of work. And it's all about what's in it for me. Nothing moves if there's nothing for me. And overstaffed, unproductive, as we all know, and lack of updating of knowledge, systems, and procedures. We all know how some of the public sector people are sent in droves to get trained in Bangkok and Singapore. And where do they end up? In the shopping streets. And what do they bring back? Zilch. So this is the unfortunate mindset and behavior of our public sector. So what can we expect? So I'm saying, in contrast, here's another public sector agency doing something completely differently and making an impact in the country, saving lives day in and day out. Integrity is key. And at SOEs area, we always believe in maintaining a sense of professionalism. And as I said, unintimidated by political pressure. And meritocracy is the only attribute for growth, nothing else. No ministerial involvement or pressure will move us to do anything that we don't believe in. So we've actually lived through 3 presidents, and I think we are the only body which was not changed with changing presidents. Our term ends, I think, next year, February or something. I'm not sure whether we'll be reappointed, but we've lived through 3 presidents, and we are still there. Public sector is driven by political interference and pressure, as you know, lack of strength to stand up to political pressure, and of course, favoritism, populist culture does not help in career development. So this is the difference. Though I call it public sector, we are also public sector, but I'm just making a difference here. Transparency is another very important thing. This is the key to the success of SOEs area. Everything depends on the fact that it is almost 100% digitized. And everything, I mean everything, is digitized. You ask any question, any data point, anything. I mean, if you ask me now, can you tell me where this particular ambulance is at this particular time? We are able to tell you. We have a 24/7 call center, and I don't want to go into the whole process, but the fact of the matter is everything, be it procurement, I mean everything is digitized. So that is why only 30 people are there to manage these thousands of people on the field. Public sector, minimum use of effective technology. So no wonder there is corruption. With this, there is absolutely no way any corruption can be found. Lack of transparency in most processes, mainly in procurement, as we know. So procurement is a big area where so much of corruption can happen. And if you digitize the system, I think it can be minimized. But unfortunately, as we all know, a lot of public sector organizations resist the digitization process. Accountability is another fourth pillar. Chairman and board responsible for all decisions and actions. We are completely accountable, and the buck stops with us. And I must say, in the Act, it gives, there is space for the chairman and the directors to earn monthly salary or allowance, but it is 100%, we do it with complete, I mean, absolutely no money is being charged. Even for us to come for meetings, it's using our own petrol and all of that. So we are not under obligation to anybody. That's the difference. Because nobody can find fault with us because everything is transparent. We are not charging money. We are just doing a service. So I'm not saying that everybody should work free of charge, but even if you are paid, there are ways of doing it in a very professional and transparent and accountable manner. And decision making is absolutely quick and rational, not emotional. And we have been adhering to all government policies, and we have had a clean bill of audit for 4 years running now. Nothing, not anything out of place. Public sector, so while the board takes ownership, public sector is all about ball passing, and that's our national pastime, right? And vacillating all the time, and externally influenced. And profit and purpose are not in the public sector lexicon nor KPIs. That is why we are where we are today. So the sad situation is that we have a wealth of expertise in most fields, but unfortunately, we lack proper leadership with a vision and passion and commitment to purpose and profit. So I think if you really look at some of our public sector corporate, SOEs or whatever, we are talking about actually a service. But is the service that they give with a purpose? That purpose factor is completely missing. So that's where I think one of the main reasons that we are going wrong, that we don't have a purpose in why we are doing what we are doing, sadly. And of course, I think it's time for us to all do an introspection to see it's not about privatization, but it's about how do we change the mindset of the people who are really running these SOEs. More than anything else, even if you privatize it, if you don't change their mindset, we will be in the same situation. But of course, there'll be a different framework coming into play. However, I think it's the attitudinal change and the mindset change that we desperately need to achieve. So that's very short and sweet, but I'm happy to answer any questions when we have that forum.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for those words, and of course made us feel how better it would be if the entire state sector is managed as good as Suresh. So on that note, without further ado, let me invite the third and final keynote speaker prior to moving on to the panel discussion, none other than Mr. Chathuranga Abeysinghe. He is a digital evangelist and consultant on digital transformation and data analytics. Chathuranga, over to you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So, thank you for this invitation and the opportunity given to talk about this topic of SOEs transformation, and my topic is about digital transformation. But before I get into my core topic, I have to tell you that there is another story to what you have been listening. So I will take few minutes to tell a different story than what you have been hearing so far from Mr. Suresh and Ms. Sandya. Ms. Sandya talked about the government service in Sri Lanka. We have to be very clear, because government or SOE sector globally is so huge, and every country has gone through SOEs transformation, privatization, and SOEs being driving the many countries for development. And the government sector, today what we speak is about Sri Lankan government sector. So that we need to first clear out. And also, today topic that I want to talk about is digital for people, in terms of, how do you bring digital technology and digital transformation for the interest of the people. And when we go into Right. So when we go into the topic of SOEs, one thing that you need to remember than what we spoke early, there's two different terms, state and government. State is us. So all the SOEs are on to us, not the government. That's the mentality that we have been dealing with in this country, right? We wouldn't have heard beautiful stories of transformation, development over 30, 40 years, but nothing has happened because we never distinguished the state and the government. State is us. Government is a temporary set of people whom we appoint from our franchise, who has gone and dismantled the SOEs of the Sri Lankan economy, right? And when it comes to SOEs, I can ask you to name any country in the world who has not used SOEs for strategic development. Every country in the world who has developed, became a developed nation, initially when they were building their economies, the government played a pivotal role. And SOEs have three purposes. One is strategic. So Mr. Suresh asked about two key areas that who can transform this country. It's the banking sector and the energy sector. Those are the only two sectors that can transform Sri Lanka. Because if you take the global development, the East Asia has been able to provide energy at a lower cost. Therefore, the manufacturing has boomed. Because the private enterprises will continue to maximize private profit, not people's profit. And then when it comes to state banks, we had two nice development banks. Now we have privatized them. Now no SME sector can uplift there. Only the tycoons and the big capital investors can do business in this country. So any country who want to transform, you need the energy sector to be efficient and provide energy at the lowest possible cost. I'm not saying at a loss. And also, you need state development banks to drive a country forward. Second is, we are a small nation without development, no GDP growth. Government needs non-tax revenue. If government tries to cream us and take our tax revenues more and more, people won't do business and the professionals will leave this country. So we will not develop this nation going forward. And again, the competition. We correctly said government will intervene to induce competition. But the world experience, the European experience, competition never came into place. The energy sector in UK has increased the prices over the past 2 decades. They are earning 5.7% of profits, where the government tried to push and say 1.7 is enough. New Zealand privatized all their energy sectors, and in 2017 they did a survey and figured out the 3 entities that were operating has been taking premium prices from their public. And they brought on another act on 2021 to regulate energy sector separate bill, because their consumer protection is strong because they have smart, non-corrupt politicians. So I want to move from here to talk about the purpose of the government. Now we know what is state, and we appoint a government temporarily to uplift the interest of the people. So we have sustainable economic growth. Is our governments have ever worked on sustainable economic growth? No. They just wanted their interest. And when it comes to the safety and well-being of the people, have we made that change across Sri Lanka? We haven't, but still, that these 3, the public services, the services that we get from government, the government's job is to make it efficient and effective and provide to us. This is the purpose of the government. So today's topic is taking a management view of SOE transformation and digitization. To take a management view, first we need to know our purpose and the intent. The purpose and the intent of the government is to do these 3, right? And when it comes to digitization, so there is these 2 words I want you to understand. Digitization and digitalization is 2 different things. Digitization is we move from analog to digital. It brings us efficiency. But digitalization is transformation of how we do things. We change our processes. We change our people. We change our way that we engage with our customer, right? So we need to understand today Sri Lanka is not at a point that we can just digitize and change. We need a digital transformation. So then you need a shift in your mind to move from here to where we want to get to, right? So this citizen-centric approach for digitalization is what world is talking about, that we take a design thinking approach where we put the consumer or the beneficiary at the center. Now who's the beneficiary of the government? Beneficiary of the government is its citizens, right? So how does each of us be part of this economic development? Do we know? Do we know what products that our country will ever make? Do we know what kind of business we should be operating on? Do we know what kind of skills that we need to dwell in? So government can use digital to make citizens part of the growth. And then the citizen as a consumer. So every service that we take, we play the role of the consumer. And if government thinks like that, the people who manage the government thinks like that, those processes will continue to improve. The lead time will reduce. Efficiency will increase. And also, how do we think citizen as an investor? You and I, my parents, we all have paid taxes. So the taxes are the ones that should go and create a return for the nation. We had zero visibility to what our taxes, just now that we are discussing what happened previous years, but we don't have clear visibility to what our money goes into, whether it goes into services, whether it goes into SOEs, what is the real ROI of that. But if you take a citizens approach, centric approach for digitization, that is where we would probably succeed. From a government perspective, as we go along with these reforms after this whole chaos, we need to ensure that minimum, most of our essential digital processes in the government has to get digitized. That is the first step, right? Digitization is the first step, and we have to get to that. And the data usage of the decision making. Are we really using the real data to make informed decisions or policy decisions? Are we still taking gut-based decisions to next era of Sri Lanka? And the transparency, I think IMF clearly said, be transparent on your contracts, and I think that is something we still fail to achieve by this month. How do we make government transparent and digitally available? And the productivity. Obviously, when you bring digital technology, the productivity will increase both in the government departments as well as in the SOEs. And lastly, about how do you use digital to get consumer feedback? That means customer feedback. Do we have a portal that we can go and tell we are not happy with this? Do we have a portal we can go and say that there's mosquitoes in the area? No, we don't have a two-way communication with the government. If government is really digitally transformation, they need to have these citizen-centric approaches implemented. Just giving a simple examples of Sri Lankan experience, we can't say that we are bad. We have started it, right? So there are certain initiatives on the health sector. There are about 30 hospitals going into digital OPD. And we have a strategy. I'm not sure how far we have reached on the agriculture. I know the ROC is quite good and it's working for us. There's EPF, ETF online. And Sri Lanka Insurance Corporation has gone on a great digital journey, and Sri Lankan Airlines as well, right? It's not that we have not done something, but pockets of excellence is there, but this is not digital transformation. I'll come to that. If you take global experience, Estonia, we can have a digital citizen. I can become an Estonian citizen from here. So that means as soon as you get this card, you are accessible to all the services in the government and you can do business. That's the level of interconnectivity and digitalization they have gone to. Singapore, very good case study about digital transformation. They talk about the digital economy, digital government, and the digital society, right? And all our government programs that's been laid out over last 20 years, they have achieved their goals in this journey. And if you take South Korea, so South Korea has a website that has all the government services. So South Korea 1991, they introduced the single digit unique identifier number. They interconnected every service. And there's one website that you can achieve everything. And if you take Denmark government does not send any letters to their citizens. No mails, no paper mails, right? So the government and the citizen communications happen digitally. Level of efficiency, you can imagine, right? And UAE will be the first country to use blockchain in the government provide services. So everything that we do with government will be a contract, a digital contract. So they are very keen that they achieve that status by 2023. And digital currency, we have been talking about digital currency, right? Many years, it's efficient, no paper, it's a digital one account to another account. The intermediary banks are against this. That's why it's not happening. So only 2 countries that will proceed with this very soon, or sooner, it will be China and Sweden. Because there's a lot of resistance from the banks. Why? There's so much of transaction revenue in between. As soon as you digitize currency, that business is out, right? And if you take the best example of using data for policy making and citizens is about the federal data strategy of US. I think we can read a lot about these transformations. These countries have gone far. But the stat says 80% of the government initiatives in digitalization fails. That's the reality. So this is a McKinsey report. They have studied 80 countries. 80% of the digital strategies fail. Why? These 5 C's are not in place. So first C is the compelling or committed leadership. So the government need a compelling, committed leadership with right intent, empathy and drive to make these changes, and we never had it. That's why we should not talk about Sri Lanka. Right? And clear purpose and priorities. Right? If it's a digitization strategy, even in a government or in your organization, if you want to go a digital journey, the purpose and the priorities has to be very clear. And the success, how does success look like? What is the value that we are going to create has to be very clear. And the cadence and the coordinated delivery. So if you are doing a program, you saw certain Sri Lankan programs you have not heard of. I have not heard of it because it's not getting reviewed every week. It's not getting followed up every week because digital products get outdated. You can design the product today and implement it in 3 years, and if it takes another 2 years for adaptation, the project is failure. We have gone through this, right? And the compelling communication, how do you communicate this to your employees and the citizens? Right? If you are not open enough to communicate this, digitization within government or digitalization does not take place. And lastly, the capability to change. I think there was discussion about government employees being lethargic, government employees being not competitive. If your employee is not competitive, whose problem is that? It's a leadership. Who appointed the leadership of SOEs? Who appointed the leadership of departments? It's the politicians. We forgot. We are everything that those leadership should be state. We allowed corrupt politicians to make those appointments. Now we are crying that we are in a different state. So lastly, if you take the maturity, this is a Deloitte's maturity curve in terms of how do you take this journey. So beginning digital, I think we are still like beginning digital in this country. And also there are certain countries who start first initiative of digitization. And then doing digital is what many countries are doing. That means they are doing multiple projects of digital. That project, this project, ad hoc, there's no strategy, right? But becoming digital is actually you believe in digital. The government is believing in digital, citizens are believing in digital literacy is increasing in the country, right? So you are being digital. Lastly is about being digital. So that means you are embracing the fullest technology in the world at this point. Now you know ChatGPT, we can set up a ChatGPT for government, very simple. You put all the documents into one engine and say ask questions, it will give you answers. You don't need the call center, right? Because that is the level of sophistication that we need to embrace. So as we go from here for Sri Lanka, these are the 4 things that I kind of share with you to end this session. So without changing the leadership, we can talk many years, right? No offense to the previous speakers. Our parents would have heard the same stories. Nothing's going to change. And again, getting the basics right, right? For a government digital strategy, you have to get the basics right. You need to get the unique ID number right. You need to create an account for every citizen. And you need to create a payment system for every citizen. You need to create a mail system for all the government services at least, right? So those are the basics you need to get right, and we have not got the basics right. And the prioritize, we can't do all the projects. What is the most value-adding project that we can do at this time? If agriculture is our priority, we go in agriculture. If health is our priority, we do that first. Because you have to put it into a metric to say complexity versus value. And you pick the ones that you can do low-hanging fruits, and you give benefits to people faster so people believe in digital. And support. I don't think Sri Lankan government has that capability. You need to bring the right experts who has helped these nations transform. There are enough global consultants who could help and drive this home. And lastly, we should not reinvent. Government services are more or less identical across the world. And if there are worked solutions, we just have to copy paste, right? So these are few things that we need to do going forward. So as I end, it's about the intent, right? So if you give your state, your children's future, future of this country to people who has bad intent, it's not going to change, right? It's not about digital, any strategic transformation. So it has to start with the top, and if that is not happening, be the change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chaturanga, for that wonderful presentation, particularly highlighted the fact that something that we go wrong in differentiating digitization and digitalization. So let us move on to the panel discussion of the 31st EFM. First of all, let me have the honor of inviting the session moderator, none other than Dr. Samantha Ratnayaka. He is the Chairman of Education, Research and Development Committee of CPM Sri Lanka, and also a Governing Council member of CPM Sri Lanka. Dr. Samantha, you may come and take your seat at the panel. And of course, let me invite the three speakers, Mr. Suresh Shah, Ms. Sandya Salgado, as well as Mr. Chathuranga Abeysinghe, also to come forward and take your seat on stage. So let me hand over proceedings to moderator, Dr. Samantha Ratnayaka.
So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Now, if we ask the 5W 1H questions here, what, where, when, why, who, so most of the answers are in your mind. For an example, if you look at the questions before we start the session, I'm just carrying this technical supported mobile. More than 15 questions already. So that it's a matter of getting package and put it to like a perspective of getting the maximum out of this panel discussion. So one fundamental argument that in line with the CPM intervention here as a professional responsible management body, that we want to bring this strategy and management where the management perspective of how to do this. Strategy at a structural country level to institutional level. The management, the execution. So in that light, if we look at a number of the C words articulate, of course, started with Mr. President crisis, then we can see a lot of critics, and we are looking at corporate ethos and getting into the other areas of competitive economy, citizen responsibility, the state versus government, and how we are getting into this line. In that light, if you look at our topic, there is a clear intervene, that is this IMF proposal. So we use a bridging word, in tandem with. So along with this, while having these diverse views, but here it's not just I would say a debate or a discussion, but we want to find it out the convergent meaning of putting into action. So in that light, by looking at the questions itself, starting with the national level ethos to the discussion itself has some multiple intriguing different views. So in that light, so we would like to start a quick question of getting off and looking at the time. Say it's now closer to 7:26. It's about 30-35 minutes discussion time. So let's try to get the maximum questions out of this. So let me start with from Mr. Abeysinghe first. A quick one from you, like the essence of the discussion, the articulation. Where we can start, like how we can start this whole process. Would you like to give a very short answer for your? Yeah, it connects here.
Yeah, it's difficult to give a short answer, but when it comes to digitalization or digital strategy, it starts with the business strategy, right? So every corporate or a country has to have a long-term plan, a short-term plan, a strategic plan. So that to complement that, we bring digital. Because digital does not come and transform organizations or countries together. So
For example, Sri Lanka, we are very clear. We don't need IMF to tell us our production has a problem, right? We are not producing enough services or goods that's to at least to cover our imports. And again, we have huge corruption. We have a fiscal deficit, right? And our tax compared to our GDP is also low because we haven't collected it, right? So those are very few fundamental things IMF has proposed us. You need to fix these things. So when it comes to those aspects in digital, we can bring digital for two things. One is we can bring efficiency and productivity so we can reduce the government expenditure. That's very clear. But bringing digital to government, you need to first improve the process. Without improving the process, bringing digital, we are digitizing waste, right? So we need a huge transformation, a restructuring. We hope that the restructuring teams will look at it, how to reform, restructure, efficient process improvements. Then only the digital will come. Second is, the public does not trust the government. So we need transparency. To bring transparency, the digital has to come in. So these two angles, I think, if we put even the short-term requirements and our long-term requirements of becoming a nation which has its own strength, we have a digital play in both areas.
Right, wonderful. With that, Mr. Sharp, in this journey, coupling with your speech and one question coming from in line with the IMF, you love to use this word reform, the bigger picture, the holistic picture of what you have highlighted. In that sense, are we in the right direction in terms of the IMF thinking and our bigger picture of the way forward? There's a question. So like, it asks about, have we got the path cleared? So that's what kind of a mixed feeling.
That goes way beyond my pay grade.
Yeah.
Are we on the right track? So the first thing is that I think we need to do what is right for our country. And we shouldn't be doing things just because the IMF or the World Bank or the ADB or somebody else says this. You know, we need to know what is right for us. We need to go on that path. In terms of what is it that we need to do, I think there are a number of things and it goes beyond economics as well. So let me put this way. In 2002, and I think the date was the 5th of December, the current president signed a document called Regain Sri Lanka. That document, now this is 20 years ago, okay, and in the contents page, so this is probably the first or the second page of this document, in the contents page, one of the headings was the public debt sustainability issue or the public debt challenge, right? So what I'm trying to say is that from a very economic perspective, as a country, we've known the solutions. And if you look at the Regain Sri Lanka document, a lot of the things that we are doing now were incorporated then. And I will give you an example. In 2003, and it may have come out of this Regain Sri Lanka document, there was a very, very good piece of legislation that the Parliament passed. It was called the Fiscal Management Responsibility Act. It was a very good piece of legislation, and the intention of this piece of legislation was to limit the fiscal deficit in the country. Had we followed that legislation, we wouldn't have been in this crisis, right? So we have had the legislation, but we have not followed it. And this is not about economics. This is about governance. The challenge that we have in this country is not an economic challenge. It's an economic challenge if we don't know the economic answers, but we know the economic answers. We know we need to export more. We know we need to create a competitive economy. We know we need to balance the fiscal account. We need to reduce our deficit. We know we need to collect more taxes. We know we need to be more productive. We know we need to develop our agriculture sector. So we know the economic answers. But why aren't we getting there? And we are not getting there because of issues around governance. And governance issues are on both the political side as well as on the side of the citizens. But let me give you a very fundamental, I'll just touch on this one fundamental point. You know, in the private sector, in management, in corporates, we say that the most important asset that we have in an organization is the people. Now just think about it. If this country is to move forward, is to develop, the most talented people should be in parliament and should be in the public sector. Is our system conducive to get the most talented people into parliament and into the public service? I'll leave the thought with you so that you can ponder over it this evening.
Yeah, so thank you very much. With that, there's an interesting question coming to Mr. Abeysinghe, but before that, may I move to Ms. Salgado? The question says, let me repackage the question while you are highlighting, articulating this corporate ethos to run the public sector while having the bigger picture of under the kind of backing in mind point is that public sector overarching having inertia, kind of a lethargic atmosphere, and but still what you are highlighting through that your case, the question asks, you are bringing some very exploitative corporate ethos which are immoral or unethical. Do you like to make that clarity in terms of what is exactly you mean by this corporate ethos in terms of bringing to the public sector that you, in your speech, if you summing it up?
Okay, so I think if I were to forget Suresh and bring that thought into the public sector organizations or SOEs, in a nutshell, I would say if we focus on profit with purpose, because we are actually about making profit, because we cannot have any more SOEs unprofitable, because it's draining the economy of the country when we are all suffering. So it's about making profit, because sometimes we feel, okay, because it's public sector and it's government, profit is not necessary. So I personally feel that it's a myth and it's a misnomer, because somehow there is this perception that profit is a dirty word when it comes to public sector organizations. And I beg to differ, because you have to make profit to pay salaries without making the government, making the organization a burden to the government. The people who are running these agencies or organizations need to look at how it can be made profitable, but not exploit people. So there is this, again, the misconception that private sector is always about exploiting people. And I beg to differ. I may be in the minority, but if you really look at running a company or an agency or a SOE, whatever, with purpose and reasonable profit, without really making a dent into the, or being a burden to the government, that's where we should be actually looking at going, is how I can answer.
Yeah,
I don't know
so
whether I answered your question.
you are stressing the fact that the larger purpose should be the
Yes.
driving force in that,
Yes.
not just a profit in that sense.
Yes,
Yeah.
I mean profit is almost, you have to make profit, because otherwise it will be eternally at a loss, and that's going to impact the government. But the purpose is the important thing. So in order to achieve that purpose, what are the ingredients that have to come into play, which at the end of the day also gives a profit? And then these organizations can run with its own steam.
So in that sense, when you are looking at last 5-6 years of the sorcery itself as a case in point, what is your level of happiness in terms of your contribution?
Yeah, so Suresh is not a profit-making organization, but as I mentioned, it is not. It is trying their level. We try our level best to work within the budget given. Now, let me give you an example. I think most of you might know. We need about 2.9 billion rupees for an year to run Suresh. every year they have been reducing the monies that is being paid to us. This year, we had to make a choice. Do we close down SOEs area because we don't really have money, or do we innovate something and at least tide this year? And we came up with a concept called Adopt an Ambulance. And we went to the public, private sector and the public and said, can you adopt an ambulance? So we came up without going to the government, because we knew that the government is not doing too well. We didn't want to burden the government further. We decided to come up with this innovative concept of adopt an ambulance. And we were able to actually raise 600 million. Our target is 1 billion, but we were able to raise 600 million. So we can at least tide through the year. So the choice is, do we close down this amazing national service that is serving every Sri Lankan, rich or poor, wherever, north or south, or do we find solutions? And the other thing is, how do we make a service like this sustainable and not being a burden to the government?
So government point of view, it's a good case to further explore, right? So probably this is not the time to do that. But having said that, Mr. Abeysinghe, there's an interesting question that is, having listened to the two speeches, I'm not making a distinction here. What you are saying that this effort of in tandem, IMF and the current crisis and countries looking forward to explore new vistas, you are still highlighting the fact that no, this is not going to work. Is that the sentiment that you want to highlight? There's a direct question.
Yeah, it's not going to work. So you need to study all the IMF programs that happen globally. So the thing is, now for example, I'll take an example and explain to you. CPC was never loss-making. It's a myth that we created, right? CPC, even with giving subsidies, they were operationally profitable. They had a mismanagement of currency in 2018, and that created huge losses because their debtors were the government. And when they wanted to buy fuel, they had to borrow. They had to borrow in dollars. So the balance sheet had so many dollar loans. When the currency depreciated, it added a huge loss to their P&L. And when you talk about SOE profits, we still look at from a corporate angle or a private business angle. Private business improve profit for shareholders. That's at the end of the P&L. But SOE's profits can be left at the consumer. So whatever the subsidy that you took from CPC or CEB ended up in all of your business's profit and loss account. Now it's not. Now 20% of our SME sector or the production has gone down. And I'm not saying we should run at a loss, but if we did without political intervention, slight changes of prices in CEB and CPC, they would never come to this situation. And for CPC, the biggest issue was we never invested on the refinery. The cheapest way that a country could give fuel is to bring crude oil and refine and give. Now we are stopping it. The whole reforms that's going to happen within next year, you will see the refinery will be closed down because it's too inefficient and too old technology. So we will be a country who will import oil and run our industries. And it's going to get imported by, funnily, two state enterprises of India and China, right? And if we believe that we would get fuel at a lower cost, I think we are conning ourselves, right? So for example, that's why I said these reforms are never to uplift production, right? To uplift production, you need to invest in people, you need to invest in business, and you need to create a competitive, actually a competitive industry, local industry to everyone to compete. So you need to bring in cooperatives, you need to induce SMEs, you need to bring more investment, foreign direct investments with a strategy. But we are not hearing with the IMF program, what industries are we going to uplift? Our 2028 forecast in the IMF program, we are going to hit at $89 billion, 89 billion GDP with similar amount of global debt. And there's no reforms in the government also, because the government expenditure will be 9 billion rupees, right? So this is balancing of accounts and not a strategy to take Sri Lanka to where it is.
To add a complementary question, Mr. Abeysinghe, in essence, your idea has been endorsed by one participant through a question, and the comment say that in essence, what is the flip is that the management is not happening in these institutions at a proper like a strategic and managerial respective levels. Instead, we are making some stories. That's what you are trying to say, is it?
Here, the thing is this, right? SOEs is the difference of SOE is private investor would invest in a private company. SOE has been investment by us, right? Why would the government go and intervene in the SOE? SOE need an independent, as I think Mr. Suresh Shah said, independent board, in expert people to run that show, right? So the real issue is the government, that means the politicians have gone and intervened all of these SOEs. If we remove that piece, who cannot make a profit out of a monopoly? I'm trying to, it's something management people you need to understand, right? You have a monopoly and you can't make it profit. How hilarious is that? And how would a monopoly run by a private institution be beneficial than a monopoly run by people? It's not going to happen. It has not happened in the world also.
Right. Coming back, Mr. Shah, now there are about 4 to 5 questions there within the same parameters. It says that your idea, the intent is very sincere. You want to do something, you have mentioned elsewhere also, you believe that this is the time to make that change. But still, your overall plan is just a rhetoric, but not like kind of a rationally structured in such a way to believe us, get the trust infused to the society. That's what one question. Would you like to give a comment on that? Your path is not rationally structured and it's not transparent. People can't understand what exactly you are trying to do. So that's might be it requires a long answer. But would you like to comment on?
I'm not sure why they say it's not rational.
Yeah.
I can only say that there is a very fundamental argument in terms of when government should retain enterprises. And that is basically when there is a market failure. So there are a couple of reasons why government needs to retain an enterprise. And that is when in the supply, again, of essential goods and services, if it is not supplied under competitive conditions, which benefit the consumer, then the government has a responsibility. If there are other mechanisms that can't be used, then government has the responsibility to take on the role of supplying. But if other mechanisms can be used, right, then it's the outcome that government needs to ensure. It doesn't need to be part of the process. It needs to ensure as an outcome that the citizens get the essential goods and services at a reasonable price, etc. Okay. So what we are trying to do is identify those enterprises that don't fit into this, and then see whether it is better to be put into private hands. And in the process of transferring them from government hands into private hands, there is a very structured process that is being followed. There are transaction advisors that will be appointed. The appointments are made in a very transparent process because we've had people advertised in the press. We've had people who have responded to those advertisements. There have been procurement committees that have evaluated those proposals, and that same principle will be followed. Now this is in appointing transaction advisors, but that same principle will be followed even when divesting enterprises. So anyone who is interested in submitting a proposal to acquire a SOE that is being divested will have the opportunity to make the proposal, and then that will be evaluated by the right technical people. There will be negotiating committees and so on and so forth. So the process that we follow, that our unit will follow, it will be a very transparent and credible process. That I want to assure everyone here. So that, I mean, from a transparency and a structured process, that's what I can say.
Yeah, okay. So you are not saying that just following of rhetorics, there's a proper way of managing and looking forward.
Yeah, and frankly, it is because we are following a very structured process.
If I may interrupt, the critical point highlighted in other question also, this trust factor is what the people are desperately looking, because they're deep-rooted, this whole ethos of privatizing, selling, even this concept itself, the moment we publish as a professional body, that there are a lot of debates, argument, are you in the government side or non-government side? That's the kind of thinking. In that sense, I think we need to have a healthy debate in this case. This trust factor, would you like to add to your answer?
I think that goes back to some of the previous experiences, maybe. So when we took on this role, there was a lot of pressure to get these things done fast. But we said, no, we have to follow a particular process. And we didn't want to compromise on the side of speed. We wanted to follow a good structured process, and that's why the process is not happening, on a very fast pace. There were enterprises that there are listed entities, for instance, which are SOEs. We could just put them on the stock market and find an investor and who might be interested in buying and then divest it. But we said, no, that's not the process we are following. We are following a proper structured process, get the right valuations, do the right due diligence, look for the right investors, and follow the process. So, which is why actually it's taking a little bit of time, if at all.
Right. Thank you very much. I think that is sufficient. There are a couple of questions from the audience point of view. Now, at this forum, you are expecting certain indications like how is the possible haircuts, debt restructuring, the sustainability, some other answers also. I wonder whether that this is the forum for that. Probably panelists can, if they want, probably you can add in terms of getting this dollar, the rupee appreciation, depreciation, the scenarios, the forecast, economic. So there are about 10 questions on that. Probably that would not be our focus at this point of time. Ms. Salgado, now there's an interesting question. You are representing indirectly, in the sense you are in a boards of a couple of banks and so on. From a financial sector point of view, as a citizen, in terms of this IMF proposals, and this time, do you think your citizens' perspective into this whole initiative, what is your take on that? You as a general citizen, how do you see this?
Yeah, something that I always believe in is a consultative process. And I have worked in the World Bank and on so many different projects, and I find that the true consultative process does not really happen. And it will be really good if all these things are taken to the public. It might take time, but people need to ask the questions. They need to find the answers, because as a citizen, I might be feeling helpless because I don't know who to believe, because media is not telling the truth. Parliament is a joke. So we don't really know where to get the information from. So if I had a choice, I would really take this to the people, have fora, have town halls, and let people ask questions and give them credible answers. And those answers should be really true. And those should be actioned accordingly. So my experience in this country is somebody takes a decision somewhere and it's implemented. Sometimes so-called public consultation happens, but that's ticking a box. But whether it really happens in the truest form, I'm not sure.
Mr. Abeysinghe, with that, thank you very much. Very interesting question. Say, for an example.
I get interesting questions.
Yeah, absolutely. That because in this interest means, in case you have been invited to involve in the process, like getting these SOE reforms in line with the IMF, what are the three things that you like to do? That's a kind of a question asked. Say, as a top priority, the government should do if you are let's say, invited to do something. That's why I say interested.
Okay, so basically our SOEs, we have clearly, I think, around 500 SOEs. Suresh, correct me if I'm wrong, 437, right? Obviously, everything is not required, right? So we need strategic SOEs. So there's ACT on it. There's 52 strategic SOEs. So what I would basically do is to prioritize why and what the purpose of that, right? So we have energy sector. The SLT talks about the communication sector, and Sri Lankan Airlines talk about, transport, aviation transport. So we need to first identify the strategic purpose of why that's been established. So that is where we will first start looking at what kind of a reform we need to make. If it's bleeding, we need fixing. So obviously the fix has been already done, no? So last month profit for CPC, maybe you might not know, 15 billion rupees, right? And 43 billion for last 3 months, right? So basically there's fixes that can be done and certain fixes already done, right? So it doesn't mean we need to go and privatize this because of the interest. Because as Suresh clearly said, essential goods and services is a very good mean of making supernormal profits. That's the problem. We have good experience with rice, no? We have enough competition in rice, but we can't control it, no? Right? So likewise, until we have a very good structured program to govern the market, it's going to be very tricky. So I would do one thing is basically to list these, prioritize these SOEs, and first to try to make it internally efficient, right? And certain ones out of 437, if they are bleeding, let's let it go. But at this moment, things like SLT, insurance, and the hotels, they are giving us some kind of non-tax revenue, right? We need to see whether we could bank on it, right? Make more profits for the government, because government has no other source of tax. So basically, I would look at in that those two angles. Whether the ones that are making profit, are they strategic, and also we need to keep with making more money for the government, and also once we can transform, which we already done. And third one is, if it's not strategic and if it's making losses, obviously sell them off.
Yeah, honestly, this story about profit making and non-profit making SOEs is a major fallacy in this sense. Think from a shareholder perspective, and in this instance, the government is a shareholder of a SOE. The shareholder doesn't get the profit of the enterprise, as we all know in the private sector, right? The profit of the enterprise belongs to the enterprise. The shareholder gets only the dividends. Now, if you look at the dividends of the last 10 years, we just did a study, the last 10 years, the average dividends that government has got from these enterprises is 0.5% of total government revenue, right? So that is what government gets from these SOEs, that's the number. Now, the thing also is that from every enterprise in the country, absolutely every enterprise in the country, government gets today a 15% of the top line of every enterprise as VAT, another 2.5% I think as social security levy, so 17.5% of your top line, and another 30% of the profit of every enterprise in the country as an income tax. So for doing nothing, the government gets 17.5% of revenue of the top line of every company and 30% of the bottom line of every company. Now by privatizing, if you can improve the efficiency, the competitiveness and the effectiveness of these organizations, the growth in revenue and profitability from those privatized enterprises and the tax revenue that you generate out of that, okay, will far compensate, will far exceed the dividends that the government gets from these enterprises today. So that's point number one. Point number two is that if you take these enterprises, and I'm just looking only at this profit and loss and the cash flow issue only, okay. There are other issues, but just taking only this particular issue. You take any of these enterprises and you privatize them and you get the sales proceeds and you put the sales proceeds in a fixed deposit, at 10% interest, forget the 20% that you have now, but just at 10% interest, that 10% interest, the cash flow you generate from that will be far greater than the dividends that the government gets. So from a purely profit, loss and a cash flow perspective, this profitable enterprises and non-profitable enterprises story is a non-starter. It's an absolute fallacy. So, because fundamentally, the profit of the enterprise does not come to government or does not come to shareholders, let me put it that way, but it's only the dividends.
Yeah, I'll add one point to that. I think whilst agreeing to Suresh, the whole story of privatization was brought in talking about losses. The whole society was waken up saying state entities are losing money and it's a burden to the treasury. That's why we should privatize. And now we are changing the narrative to say it doesn't matter, right? But the other thing is, even they make profit or loss, who takes care of the strategic value that it was giving to the society? Let's agree that SLT is going to get sold for some 3 billion, I don't know, $1 billion. What about the ability of providing digital technology to rural areas? What was our vision when we had SLT? Right? What was the vision? Our vision was digitally enabled nation. Would Dialogue and Etisalat and other private entities go to places where there are no humans? No, right? So basically, there's strategic intent of these things. So yes, just looking at by cash flow, we can't take a decision. As similarly, we cannot look at the perspective of the national interest which these SOEs were established.
So we are heading to the last 5 to 8 minutes. While having that, this is getting further provoked now. Mr. Shah wants to give a quick response to that.
So let me take the SLT example itself. To start with, SLT I don't think is a strategic enterprise from a country's perspective in that sense, fundamentally because 65% of the country uses non-SLT communication services rather than SLT communication services. And also I think quite a few people in government actually use non-SLT services as well. But leave all that aside. If the government, it's not the role of the enterprise to provide digital access to a village. It's not the role of the enterprise. It's the role of the government to do that, if that is part and parcel of the government strategy. And the government has multiple ways of doing this. So one way to do it, for example, is to call quotations from any one of the telecom suppliers or the telecom companies and say for every mile or for every kilometer that you lay, let's say a fiber line, okay, what's the income that you want for it? You don't need to own a telecommunication company to do this. Similarly, if you want to provide a fuel subsidy, let's say, and like I said earlier when I was speaking, government has every right to provide a subsidy. So if the government wants to provide a fuel subsidy, there is nothing to stop the government passing that subsidy through any one of the fuel suppliers in the country. It can tell LIOC, for example, your cost at the pump or your selling price at the pump is say 300 rupees, right? But we want you to sell it at 250. We will give you the 50 rupees. Government does not need to own a fuel supplier to do that. There are multiple mechanisms, and we were talking about digital technology, and with the onset of digital technology and with the growth of digital technology and the expansion of digital technology, the ability of government becomes even stronger. So the fundamental point that I'm making is this. Government has a responsibility to ensure that citizens have access to essential goods and services at the right price, right quality, etc. Government has multiple mechanisms that it can use to ensure that outcome, right? So it's that example I took. When you eat fish, you don't go catch it. You have different ways in which you can get that fish, and you do that by looking at multiple things. What's more convenient for me? What is less time consuming? What are, Where do I put my resources and so on and so forth. Government needs to go through that same process. It needs to focus on the outcome rather than on the process.
Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, neo-economic economic sentiments as well as the other political or ideological narratives. So, this is the kind of a conundrum that we have. So, while we are striking, but still, this is the one comment say that this is not time to debate. This is time to act. While saying that, before we close this, the few questions, let me package it something like this. Starting with Ms. Salgado, say, in terms of the different stakeholders from a citizen's point of view, they involve based on their power base and their interest about this whole process, while leaving or not leaving their political ideologies. From a general citizen's point of view, what is your wrapping up answer in terms of where we should strike a balance in terms of bringing the strategy and management to take the country forward? Would you like to, while giving a comment on that, wrap up your comment in brief?
Yeah, so I think strategy and management has to go in tandem. But what I think we really lack is this word called strategy, because we are looking at short-term benefits, short-term profits, short-term votes, short-term everything, and politicizing the whole process. So for me, one main thing is apolitical leadership to run these organizations. And also the other thing is a vision beyond just the next election. Unfortunately, I think people have suffered long enough and they feel helpless and hopeless. Whatever is being said and done, I think the citizen is feeling that helplessness and hopelessness. So it will be really great if whatever government or whatever leadership in this country gives hope and leadership, the proper strategic leadership to transform the country from where we are to where we want to be. But in order to do that, I think a lot of change has to happen from a mindset, behavior, and also action. So no point having strategies if there's no proper action. And transparency and governance and accountability. I mean, these are all things that need to come into the package. It's like a wish list, but without any of those, none of the reforms, nothing will work in this country. So it's that visionary leadership, unfortunately, which we need and which we seem to lack at the moment.
Right. So with that point, Mr. Abeysinghe, your wrapping up comment, while appreciating your contemporary current views and the kind of a big, hairy, audacious articulation about the country's way forward in line with the digitalization, while appreciating that, the question asked, probably you can include to that your wrapping up comment. In your talk, even though you are saying that these things to be done, but still the how factor is missing. The execution part is missing. That's what one comment say. Would you like to add that and wrap up your comments?
Yeah. So how there's no other way, we need, as Madam said, that we need leadership that's genuine and intentive. And that leadership needs a mandate from people. Change cannot happen in isolation. So change needs a mandate. Whichever the direction that country needs to take place, I think it's right time that we ask the people which direction we should go, right? And in that, I think whatever the political leadership in this country, different parties are there, they should present the go forward plan. And that plan, people has to sign off on. Then the country can see the how and the what part, right? So if people decide the presented how part is good in whoever, people will believe in and people will do. So when it comes to the how, the intent matters first. Because strategies, as Mr. Suresh said, it's very clear. What we want to do is very clear. What our SOEs we want to do is very clear. Sustainable development goals are very clear. Management expectations are very clear, right? We just need to depoliticize institutions, right? I couldn't add on the previous one. If we can depoliticize SOEs, we could do much better than what we are doing today. It's not only about the SOEs. So everywhere, if the government plays its role, and let alone the enterprises do their job, I think how is not a magic, because countries have transformed. Countries have transformed from top to bottom, not bottom to top, right? Right leaders, right vision, right ambition. If you come to work on time as a leader, your workforce will come on time to work. If you work efficiently as a leader, if you take action against the people who are corrupt, if you take action against people who are not performing, the people will perform. Workforce is not to be blamed, it's a leadership. So how starts with top. And we have enough knowledge here and across the country and also outside the country. If you ask how to fix anything in this country, we will know.
Thank you very much. With that, Mr. Shah, while appreciating your effort and looking forward this kind of a move, but still the one question highlights that what is the distinction this time? Like we have come to the rock bottom, so that where to start? Like are we, this healthy debate should continue, but this discussion is enough. That's what the question says, like where this turning point is like begin. So would you like to include that to your wrapping up comment?
Yeah, so actually I'll put it in a question form as well. Before this particular IMF program, we signed 16 other IMF programs before this. What makes any one of you think that the 17th is going to bring a different result from the 16 in the past? I'm willing to take a bet with anyone in the room that in another 5 years we'll be on our 18th IMF program. And that's not because we don't know economics. That is because our governance systems in the country are not strong enough, right? We, both Chathuranga and Sandya spoke about depoliticization of the system. That depoliticization of the system is not going to come as a result of the goodness of people sitting in leadership positions, right? That's not the way to do it. It's, you know, we've depended on the goodness of individuals for 75 years and see where it has left us. We need legislation, we need governance systems enmeshed in our system to make sure that it happens. We need to structure our systems in a way that even if an absolutely corrupt, despicable individual sits on the highest chair in the country, the systems and processes in the country will make sure that the damage that person can do will be minimal. I'll give you a very simple example, and I challenge any political party in this country to make this very simple change. Article 52(2) of our constitution says that a ministry secretary needs to work under the direction and control, those are the two words used, under the direction and control of the minister. That's where the problem starts, right? I challenge any political party to make this change, where you release the ministry secretary from the direction and control of the minister. The minister should be responsible for policy, but the secretary should be responsible for administration and running of the ministry. Let's start with changes like that. That's where we need to make the changes. If we bring those changes in, then we can have a system to make sure that the country runs well. That's the way to do it. It's not by depending on how good someone is or how good someone says they are. That's not what it is. We need to have the systems and processes to ensure that even if a bad guy sits or a girl sits in that top chair of the country, the systems and processes will make sure that the damage they do will be minimal.
Thank you. I think that's a good remark to kind of a very powerful remark to conclude this before I hand over to the MC Ladies and gentlemen, we are not ignoring the questions with regard to this debt restructuring, economic sentiments, the country forecast, and there are about 10 questions lined up here. Probably soon after this, you can meet this the gathering. You can see that all the diverse members are representing from multiple organizations. You can ask from them directly, and even the panelists for that matter. Having said that, as a professional management body, so our sincere intention is to someone should intervene in this kind of healthy discussions, debates. So the idea is that bringing strategy, management. So we are representing for management, so that if CPM can assist, leverage in this task, so we are very much happy to do, as that's what President says in his message. So with that sincere intention, we got this discussion. Even some critical debates of national interest, we like to take it forward. With that sentiments, over to you, MC Dr. Dilla.
Thank you very much, Dr. Samantha. A big hand, ladies and gentlemen, to the panelists as well as the moderator on the completion of a very worthwhile panel discussion on a timely topic. As we have reached the concluding stages of this EFM, let me now take the opportunity to invite the founder and president of CPM Sri Lanka, Professor Lakshmanar Vatawala, to come forward and hand over tokens of appreciation to the panelists as well as the moderator. First of all, Mr. Chathuranga Abeysinghe. Now let us have Ms. Sandya Salgado. And the applause should be more energetic. This next token of appreciation goes to Mr. Suresh Shah. Last of all, certainly not the least, our session moderator, Dr. Samantha Ratnayaka. With that, we conclude the 31st presentation of Evening for Managers organized by Chartered Professional Managers of Sri Lanka. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here and being a lovely audience. And I'm sure you can network with the panelists now that we have done with the job formally. You can informally have all your questions raised with the panelists after this. So thank you very much. Have a pleasant evening till we meet at the 32nd such EFM.